The thunderous crash of the front door splintering off its hinges shattered the peaceful Saturday afternoon like a gunshot through crystal. 11-year-old Ben Martinez dropped his makeshift treasure map. The carefully drawn lines and X marks scattered across the sidewalk as black-clad figures swarmed the front yard of his family's modest suburban home. The SWAT officers moved with military precision, their tactical boots pounding against the concrete, weapons drawn, and voices barking commands that cut through the summer air like razor blades. "Get down! Get down now!" The lead officer's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, amplified by the megaphone strapped to his tactical vest. Ben stood frozen in his oversized dog costume, the floppy brown ears of his retriever outfit trembling as his young mind struggled to process the chaos erupting around him. The costume had been perfect for the neighborhood treasure hunt, complete with a tail that wagged when he moved and paws that made satisfying clicking sounds on the pavement. Now it felt like a trap, the fabric suddenly heavy and suffocating as he watched his neighbors emerge from their homes, faces painted with confusion and growing horror. "Mrs. Rodriguez from next door clutched her phone to her chest, her lips moving in what Ben recognized as a prayer. Mr. Thompson stood on his porch, with his morning coffee still steaming in his hands, the mug forgotten as he witnessed the scene unfolding before him. Children who had been playing hopscotch and riding bicycles just moments before now huddled behind their parents, wide eyes peering out from behind protective arms and legs. The morning had begun so differently. Ben had woken up excited about the neighborhood treasure hunt that Mrs. Chen from the community center had organized. She had spent weeks creating clues that would take the children all around Maple Street, past the old oak tree, where generations of kids had carved their initials, through the small park where elderly residents fed pigeons every morning, and around the community garden where vegetables grew in neat, organized rows. The costume had been his mother's idea, a creative twist that would make him stand out from the other participants. "You'll be the cutest little dog detective," his mother, Maria, had said while helping him adjust the costume that morning. Her hands had been gentle as she fixed the ears and made sure the tail was securely attached. "Just remember to stay on our street and the one block over. Don't go wandering off where I can't see you. Mijo." Ben had nodded eagerly, already imagining the adventures ahead. The first clue had led him to the mailbox at the corner of Maple and Pine, where he'd found a riddle written in Mrs. Chen's careful handwriting. The second clue had taken him past the Johnson house, where their golden retriever, Buddy, had barked a friendly greeting from behind the chain-link fence. Ben had barked back playfully, getting into character as he searched for the next piece of the puzzle. It was while he was examining the base of the large elm tree in the Hendersons' front yard that Karen Whitmore first spotted him from her living room window. Karen lived 3 houses down from the Martinez family, in a pristine colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and security cameras positioned at every corner. She had moved to Maple Street 6 months earlier, bringing with her a reputation for complaints, petitions, and an uncanny ability to find problems where none had existed before. Karen's house stood out on the block like a fortress among cottages, its stark white facade and geometric hedges creating an intimidating contrast to the warm, lived-in homes surrounding it. She had already filed complaints with the Homeowners Association about children's chalk art on sidewalks, demanded the removal of a community Little Free Library because it attracted undesirable elements, and insisted that the weekly music practice sessions in the park constituted a noise violation. From her window, Karen watched Ben moving around the tree, his costume making his movements appear exaggerated and unfamiliar. The distance and her poor eyesight, combined with her tendency toward paranoia, transformed the scene in her mind. The playful 11-year-old became something far more sinister, something that threatened the pristine order she had worked so hard to establish in her new neighborhood. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, her imagination already spinning the encounter into something far more dramatic than reality. In her version of events, Ben wasn't a child playing dress-up. He was an intruder, possibly dangerous, certainly up to no good in broad daylight. The costume wasn't creative play. It was a disguise. The movement around the tree wasn't innocent exploration. It was suspicious behavior that demanded immediate intervention. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, trained to handle everything from heart attacks to house fires with equal composure. Karen's voice trembled with manufactured urgency as she spoke into the phone. There's some kind of wild animal loose in my neighborhood. It's huge, maybe 6 feet tall, and it's acting aggressively. It's been stalking around people's property for the past 20 minutes. I think it might be rabbit or something. It's definitely not normal behavior. The dispatcher asked for clarification, but Karen was already committed to her narrative. She described a creature that bore no resemblance to the child playing innocent games just yards away from her window. In her version, Ben's movements became stalking. His costume became matted fur. His size became exaggerated to that of a full-grown adult. She painted a picture of imminent danger, of a neighborhood under siege by forces beyond their control. I need someone here immediately, Karen insisted, her voice rising with each word. There are children in this neighborhood. This thing could attack at any moment. I can see it right now, and it's getting more aggressive by the minute. The call was processed according to protocol, categorized as a dangerous animal incident with potential for human injury. The dispatcher contacted animal control, but they were handling another emergency across town. The description of a large, aggressive creature in a residential area triggered additional protocols. And soon, the call was escalated to law enforcement with a request for immediate response. Meanwhile, Ben continued his treasure hunt, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. He had found the third clue tucked behind a loose piece of bark on the elm tree, and the riddle was proving more challenging than the others. Where neighbors gather when the sun grows dim, look for the place where stories begin. He stood in the shade of the tree, his costumed figure casting playful shadows on the grass as he puzzled over the meaning. The sound of sirens in the distance didn't immediately concern him. Emergency vehicles were common enough in any neighborhood, and Ben had learned to distinguish between the different types by their sounds. These seemed to be police cars, rather than fire trucks or ambulances. But even that didn't strike him as unusual. It was only when the sirens grew louder and more numerous that he began to feel the first prickle of unease. From her window, Karen watched the approach of the emergency vehicles with a mixture of satisfaction and growing anxiety. She had expected animal control, perhaps a single police car for backup. Instead, she could see multiple units converging on Maple Street, their lights painting the normally quiet residential area in alternating patterns of red and blue. The magnitude of the response began to dawn on her, but instead of reconsidering her report, she doubled down on her story. They're here, she told the dispatcher, who was still on the line. Thank goodness. This thing is still out there, and I think it sees the police cars. It might try to run or attack. You need to tell them to be very careful. The first patrol car rounded the corner onto Maple Street at 12:47 p.m., followed immediately by 3 more units and an emergency response van. The officers emerged from their vehicles with practiced efficiency, but their preparation was for a very different scenario than what awaited them. They had been briefed about a large, potentially dangerous animal, possibly rabid, threatening a residential neighborhood. They expected to find something that required animal control expertise and possibly medical intervention. What they found instead was Ben Martinez, standing perfectly still in his dog costume, holding a piece of paper in his small hands and looking around with the confused expression of a child who has suddenly found himself at the center of adult attention he doesn't understand. The lead officer, Sergeant Matthews, was a 15-year veteran of the police force with experience in everything from domestic disputes to armed robberies. He had responded to countless animal control calls over the years, from escaped exotic pets to aggressive stray dogs. He had never encountered anything quite like this situation, where the reported threat seemed so dramatically different from the reality before him. But training and protocol took precedence over personal judgment in high-stress situations. The report had described a large, aggressive creature, and Sergeant Matthews could see a figure in what appeared to be an animal costume. The distance and the unusual nature of the situation created enough ambiguity that the officers proceeded with extreme caution. "Police don't move," Sergeant Matthews called out, his voice carrying across the street with authoritative force. The command was standard procedure for potentially dangerous situations, designed to control the scene and prevent escalation. But for Ben, the words were like thunder on a clear day, completely unexpected and utterly terrifying. The 11-year-old boy froze completely, his treasure hunt forgotten, as he tried to understand why police officers were shouting at him. The costume that had felt so fun and adventurous just minutes before now felt like a burden, making it difficult to move naturally or communicate clearly. The head of the costume limited his peripheral vision, and the paws made it hard to gesture or show his hands clearly. "I said don't move." The second command came when Ben instinctively started to raise his hands, a movement that the officers interpreted as potentially threatening. More units arrived, and the street began to fill with emergency vehicles, their lights creating a disorienting strobe effect that added to the confusion and fear. Mrs. Martinez was inside the house when the sirens first reached the neighborhood, but the sound of shouting drew her to the front window. What she saw made her blood turn to ice in her veins. Her son, her baby, was standing in the middle of what looked like a crime scene, surrounded by police officers with their hands on their weapons. "Ben," she screamed, rushing toward the front door. But Officer Williams intercepted her before she could reach her son, his firm grip on her arm stopping her progress. "Ma'am, you need to stay back. We have a situation under control, but I need you to remain at a safe distance until we can assess the threat level." "That's my son." Maria Martinez's voice cracked with panic and fury. "That's my 11-year-old son. What are you doing to him?" The confusion rippled through the group of officers like a wave. The radio chatter became more intense as they tried to reconcile the report they had received with the scene before them. But momentum in law enforcement situations has its own gravity, and once certain procedures are initiated, they follow their course until completion. "Son, I need you to slowly remove that costume," Sergeant Matthews called out, his tone attempting to be both authoritative and reassuring. "Keep your movements slow and deliberate. We're here to help, but we need to see who you are." Ben's small voice barely carried across the distance between them. "I can't take it off by myself. The zipper's in the back. My mom helped me put it on this morning." The admission of helplessness should have been a clear indicator of the situation's true nature. But the stress of the moment and the pressure of the emergency response created a tunnel vision that prevented clear assessment. Instead of recognizing the voice of a frightened child, some officers heard what they interpreted as evasion or potential deception. "We're going to approach you slowly," Sergeant Matthews announced. "Don't make any sudden movements. We just want to help you out of that costume." But as the officers moved closer, Ben's anxiety reached a breaking point. The costume felt suffocating. The attention was overwhelming. And he couldn't understand why these adults were treating him like a threat. He did what any frightened child would do. He started to cry and instinctively took a step backward, toward the familiar safety of his own home. That single step backward triggered a cascade of reactions. Officer Davis, who had positioned himself to Ben's left, interpreted the movement as an attempt to flee. His training kicked in, and he moved to intercept what he perceived as a potentially dangerous subject attempting to escape. "He's running!" Davis shouted. Although Ben was merely backing away slowly while crying, the call triggered additional response from the other officers. And suddenly, the frightened child found himself tackled to the ground by two grown men in uniform. The impact drove the breath from Ben's lungs and sent his treasure hunt clues scattering across the Martinez family's front lawn. The costume head twisted awkwardly as he hit the ground, partially blocking his vision and making it difficult to breathe. The weight of the officers pressing down on him was terrifying and suffocating, unlike anything he had ever experienced in his young life. "Please," he gasped between sobs. "I'm just playing treasure hunt. I'm just a kid. Please let me go." But the officers were still operating under the assumption that they were dealing with an adult in disguise, possibly someone mentally unstable or under the influence of drugs. The costume made it difficult to immediately assess Ben's age or size accurately, and the high-stress situation prevented the kind of careful observation that would have quickly resolved the confusion. As they worked to restrain him, one officer noticed that the animal was wearing sneakers, clearly human footwear that didn't match the costume. Another observed that the subject seemed much smaller than the initial report had indicated. But these observations took time to process and communicate in the chaos of the moment. Mrs. Martinez broke free from Officer Williams' restraining grip and ran toward her son, her maternal instincts overriding any concern for protocol or procedure. "Get off my baby! He's 11 years old. Get your hands off him right now!" Her voice cut through the confusion like a knife through fabric, carrying a fury and desperation that demanded immediate attention. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes by now, drawn by the commotion and the unusual presence of so many emergency vehicles on their quiet street. Mr. Chen from the corner house, who had organized the treasure hunt, pushed through the gathering crowd with Mrs. Chen close behind him. "That's Ben Martinez," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the scene. "He's participating in our neighborhood treasure hunt. He's just a child." The confirmation from multiple sources began to penetrate the fog of confusion and protocol. Sergeant Matthews held up his hand to signal the other officers to ease their restraint, while he knelt down closer to Ben. When he looked directly into the child's face through the costume opening, he saw what should have been obvious from the beginning: the tear-streaked face of a frightened little boy. "Oh my God," he said quietly, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Stand down. Everyone stand down right now." The officers immediately backed away from Ben, who curled up on the ground, sobbing and calling for his mother. Maria Martinez pushed through the circle of law enforcement officers and gathered her son into her arms, her own tears flowing freely as she tried to comfort him and assess whether he had been injured. "Mijo, it's okay. Mama's here. You're safe now," she whispered into his ear, her voice thick with emotion and barely controlled rage. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." As the immediate crisis subsided, the magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in for everyone present. A routine emergency call had escalated into the traumatization of an innocent child, all based on a report that bore no resemblance to reality. The officers stood around awkwardly, their training having prepared them for many scenarios, but not for the realization that they had just tackled and restrained an 11-year-old boy playing dress-up. Sergeant Matthews approached Mrs. Martinez cautiously, his own shock evident in his expression. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. We received a report of a dangerous animal, and we responded according to protocol. We had no idea we were dealing with a child." Maria Martinez looked up at him with eyes blazing with protective fury. A dangerous animal. Look at him. He's wearing a costume. He's carrying treasure hunt clues. What kind of dangerous animal carries homework from the community center? The questions hung in the air like accusations. And they were accusations that demanded answers. How had a simple children's activity been transformed into a threat requiring SWAT-level response? Who had made the initial report? And how had the facts become so distorted in transmission? From her window, Karen Whitmore watched the scene unfold with growing dread. The emergency response she had triggered had clearly gone far beyond what she had intended, and the reality of the situation was becoming impossible to ignore. The dangerous creature she had reported was obviously a child, and that child was now traumatized and crying in his mother's arms. But rather than immediately coming forward to clarify her mistake, Karen found herself paralyzed by the magnitude of what she had set in motion. The street was full of emergency vehicles. Neighbors were gathering and asking questions, and it was becoming clear that someone would be held accountable for the false report that had led to this disaster. As the officers began the process of de-escalating the scene and documenting what had occurred, more neighbors emerged with information that painted a fuller picture of the morning's events. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned seeing Ben playing in the costume earlier, participating in what was clearly a community activity. Mr. Thompson confirmed that he had watched the child for several minutes before the police arrived, noting nothing unusual or threatening about his behavior. Mrs. Chen approached the group with a folder full of treasure hunt materials, evidence that corroborated Ben's story about his activities. I organized this hunt for the children in our neighborhood, she explained to Sergeant Matthews. Ben was just following the clues I created. This is supposed to be fun for them, not terrifying. The documentation of Ben's legitimate presence in the neighborhood raised new questions about the original emergency call. How had someone witnessed the same scene that neighbors described as innocent play and interpreted it as a dangerous threat requiring immediate law enforcement intervention? Officer Davis began canvassing the immediate area to identify the source of the 911 call. The dispatcher would have a record of the caller's number and location, information that would be crucial for understanding how such a dramatic misreporting had occurred. As he moved from house to house, residents expressed shock and confusion about the morning's events. I've been watching that boy play for half an hour, elderly Mrs. Patterson told Officer Davis. He's been nothing but polite and careful. Even said "excuse me" when he had to look behind my flower bushes for one of his clues. Whoever reported him as dangerous wasn't paying very close attention. Similar accounts emerged from other neighbors, creating a consistent picture of Ben's innocent activities throughout the morning. The contrast between these eyewitness accounts and the emergency report became more stark with each interview, suggesting either a serious misunderstanding or deliberate exaggeration on the part of the original caller. While Officer Davis conducted his interviews, Mrs. Martinez helped Ben out of his costume and checked him for injuries. The boy was shaken, but physically unharmed, though the emotional trauma of being tackled and restrained by multiple adults would likely require time and possibly counseling to overcome. Why did they hurt me? Mama, Ben asked through his tears. I was just playing the game Mrs. Chen made for us. I didn't do anything wrong. Maria Martinez held her son close, struggling to find words that could explain adult failures to a child who had done nothing but follow the rules of a community game. You didn't do anything wrong. Mijo. This was a big mistake by grown-ups who should have been more careful before they acted. Her words were chosen carefully, but her eyes burned with an anger that promised consequences for whoever was responsible for her son's trauma. As a paralegal who worked for a civil rights attorney, Maria Martinez understood both the legal and social implications of what had just occurred. A false emergency report had led to the excessive use of force against a minority child, creating liability issues that extended far beyond a simple miscommunication. The breakthrough in identifying the source of the false report came from an unexpected source. Marcus Johnson, who lived 2 houses down from the Martinez family, approached Officer Davis with information about his home security system. Like many residents on the block, Marcus had installed a smart doorbell camera that recorded activity in front of his house and the surrounding area. "My camera has been recording all morning," Marcus explained. "It probably caught whatever happened, and it might have audio of any conversations in the area. Would that be helpful for your investigation?" Officer Davis immediately recognized the potential value of video evidence that could clarify the timeline and circumstances of the morning's events. Modern doorbell cameras often captured much more than their owners realized, including activities on neighboring properties and conversations taking place nearby. As Marcus pulled up the footage on his smartphone, a crowd of neighbors gathered around to see what the camera had recorded. The video clearly showed Ben in his costume, moving from location to location as he followed his treasure hunt clues. His behavior was obviously that of a child engaged in play, careful and considerate of other people's property. But the most damning evidence came from the audio portion of the recording. At 11:42 a.m., just minutes before the police arrived, the camera had captured a phone conversation taking place near the street. The voice was female, agitated, and clearly audible as she spoke to what was obviously a 911 dispatcher. "It's huge, maybe 6 feet tall, and it's acting aggressively," the voice said. "It's been stalking around people's property for the past 20 minutes. I think it might be rabid or something." The description bore no resemblance to the child visible in the video, who was clearly smaller than an adult and moving in a playful, non-threatening manner. But the audio continued, and the voice became even more dramatic in its characterizations. "This thing could attack at any moment. I can see it right now. And it's getting more aggressive by the minute." As the recording played, several neighbors exchanged glances of recognition. The voice was familiar to many of them, belonging to someone who had made herself known in the neighborhood through various complaints and confrontations over the past 6 months. "That's Karen Whitmore," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. "She lives in the white colonial 3 houses down. She's the one who complained about the children's chalk art and tried to get the little free library removed." The identification of Karen as the source of the false report sent a ripple of anger through the gathered neighbors. Many of them had dealt with her complaints and criticisms since her arrival in the neighborhood. But this incident represented an escalation that went far beyond property disputes or noise complaints. Sergeant Matthews took possession of the doorbell camera footage as evidence. Recognizing its crucial importance in documenting both Ben's innocent behavior and the false nature of the emergency report, the audio clearly demonstrated that the caller had grossly exaggerated and mischaracterized what she observed, leading directly to the traumatic incident that had just occurred. As news of the video evidence spread through the crowd, attention turned toward Karen Whitmore's house. Several neighbors reported seeing her watching the police response from her living room window, but she had not come outside to clarify her report or assist with the investigation. Her absence from the scene raised questions about whether she understood the consequences of her actions. Officer Davis approached Karen's front door to interview her about the 911 call, but found no response to his knocking. The house appeared occupied, with lights on and a car in the driveway, but Karen seemed unwilling to answer the door or speak with law enforcement about her report. Meanwhile, word of the incident began to spread beyond the immediate neighborhood. Mrs. Chen called the community center to report what had happened to Ben, explaining that the treasure hunt had been disrupted by police action. Other neighbors began contacting family members and friends. sharing their shock and outrage about the excessive response to a child's innocent play. Maria Martinez, still comforting her son, began making phone calls of her own. Her first call was to her husband, Roberto, who worked as a supervisor at a nearby manufacturing plant. Her second call was to her boss, attorney James Morrison, who specialized in civil rights cases and had experience with police misconduct issues. "Jim, I need your advice," Maria said when the attorney answered his phone. "Something terrible just happened to Ben, and I think we need to take legal action to make sure it never happens to another child." As she described the morning's events, including the false report and the excessive police response, Attorney Morrison recognized the serious civil rights implications of the case. A false emergency report targeting a minority child, leading to unnecessary use of force, created potential liability under several federal statutes designed to protect citizens from discrimination and police misconduct. Document everything, Morrison advised. Take photos of any injuries, get copies of all police reports, and preserve any video evidence. We need to build a complete record of what happened and why it happened. This sounds like it could be a significant case. The legal implications were just beginning to unfold, but the social and community impact was already becoming apparent. The incident had revealed deep divisions within the neighborhood about reporting, safety, and the treatment of children. Some residents expressed support for Karen's right to report suspicious activity, while others were outraged by her apparent exaggeration and the trauma inflicted on Ben. As the afternoon progressed, the doorbell camera footage began circulating beyond the immediate neighborhood. Marcus Johnson shared the video with local community groups on social media, and it quickly gained attention from parents and civil rights advocates who recognized the broader implications of the incident. The contrast between Ben's innocent behavior in the video and the dramatic emergency response was stark and disturbing. Viewers could see for themselves that the child posed no threat to anyone, making the police action appear excessive and unnecessary. Comments on the social media posts expressed outrage about the treatment of the child and questions about accountability for the false report. Local news stations picked up the story by evening, interviewing neighbors and community leaders about the incident. The footage from Marcus Johnson's doorbell camera became central evidence in the developing narrative about false reporting and police response protocols. News anchors struggled to explain how a routine children's activity had escalated into a traumatic encounter with law enforcement. Ben Martinez, still recovering from his ordeal, watched the news coverage from his family's living room with a mixture of confusion and growing awareness that his experience had meaning beyond his own trauma. The reporters were talking about him, about what had happened to him, and about questions of fairness and safety that he was only beginning to understand. "Why are they showing my picture on TV? Mama?" he asked his mother as footage of him in his dog costume played on the screen. Maria Martinez chose her words carefully, wanting to help her son understand the significance of what had happened without overwhelming him with adult complexities. "Because what happened to you was wrong, mijo, and people need to know about it so we can make sure it doesn't happen to other children." The story gained national attention over the following days as civil rights organizations and child advocacy groups highlighted the case as an example of how false reporting could endanger innocent children. The video evidence made it impossible to dispute the facts of the incident, creating a clear-cut case study in the dangers of exaggerated emergency reports. Karen Whitmore found herself at the center of a national controversy that she had never anticipated when she made her 911 call. The doorbell camera footage had captured not only her false report, but also additional commentary she had made while watching the police response unfold. In that additional audio, Karen could be heard making disparaging remarks about Ben's size and appearance, suggesting that her report had been motivated by more than simple misidentification. "Look at that thing. Her recorded voice said as she watched Ben being tackled by police officers. "I knew something wasn't right about it. These people need to control their kids better, or keep them inside where they belong." The callous nature of her comments while watching a child being traumatized by police created additional outrage and suggested that her actions had been motivated by prejudice rather than genuine concern for safety. Legal experts began discussing the case as an example of how false reporting could be used as a weapon against minority families and their children. The police department launched an internal investigation into the incident, examining both the response protocols and the handling of the emergency call, while the officers had followed standard procedures for responding to reports of dangerous animals. Questions arose about whether additional verification should have been required before deploying such a significant force. Sergeant Matthews, who had led the response team, expressed regret about the incident in interviews with internal affairs investigators. "We responded to the information we were given," he explained. "But looking back, there were signs we should have recognized earlier that we were dealing with a child rather than an actual threat." The police chief announced changes to department protocols, including requirements for additional verification of animal-related emergency calls and enhanced training for officers in rapidly assessing potential threats. The changes were designed to prevent similar incidents while maintaining appropriate response capabilities for genuine emergencies. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office began reviewing the case for potential criminal charges against Karen Whitmore. False reporting to emergency services was a serious offense under state law, particularly when it resulted in the unnecessary deployment of emergency resources and endangered innocent people. The video evidence provided clear documentation of the discrepancy between Karen's report and the actual situation she observed. Attorney Morrison filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of the Martinez family, alleging that Karen's false report had been motivated by racial and socioeconomic bias. The lawsuit sought damages for Ben's emotional trauma and requested injunctive relief to prevent similar incidents in the future. The case attracted attention from civil rights organizations nationwide, who saw it as an opportunity to establish legal precedents protecting children from discriminatory reporting. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the Martinez family focused on helping Ben recover from his traumatic experience. They arranged for counseling to help him process what had happened and to address any lasting fears about law enforcement or community activities. The 11-year-old showed remarkable resilience, but the incident had clearly affected his sense of safety and trust in adult institutions. The neighborhood itself began a process of healing and reflection, with community meetings designed to address the underlying issues that had contributed to the incident. Mrs. Chen organized discussions about bias, reporting, and child safety, bringing together residents with different perspectives on the events of that Saturday morning. Some neighbors expressed continued support for Karen's right to report suspicious activity, arguing that better safe than sorry was an appropriate approach to community safety. Others countered that the incident demonstrated the dangers of false reporting and the need for more careful observation before involving emergency services. "We all have a responsibility to each other," Mrs. Rodriguez said during one community meeting. "That includes protecting our children from unnecessary harm, whether it comes from real threats or from our own fears and prejudices." The meetings revealed deep divisions within the neighborhood about race, class, and belonging. Some longtime residents expressed frustration with newer neighbors who seemed to view normal childhood activities as threatening. Others defended the right of all residents to feel safe and to report concerns to appropriate authorities. Marcus Johnson's doorbell camera footage continued to serve as a focal point for these discussions, providing objective evidence of both Ben's innocent behavior and Karen's exaggerated reporting. The video had become a teaching tool, used in community discussions and law enforcement training to illustrate the importance of accurate observation and reporting. As summer turned to fall, the legal cases against Karen Whitmore moved through the court system. The criminal charges for false reporting resulted in a plea agreement that required her to pay restitution to cover the cost of the emergency response and to complete community service focused on child safety education. The civil rights lawsuit was scheduled for trial the following spring. The incident had transformed Karen from a neighborhood complainer into a nationally recognized example of how false reporting could endanger children. She found herself the subject of news articles, social media campaigns, and legal seminars focused on the dangers of bias-motivated emergency calls. The attention was overwhelmingly negative, and she eventually decided to sell her house and move away from Maple Street. Ben Martinez gradually resumed his normal activities, though he remained more cautious about playing in costume or participating in neighborhood events. His experience had matured him in ways that no 11-year-old should have to endure. But it had also made him a symbol of resilience and the importance of community support for children facing unjust treatment. The treasure hunt that had been interrupted by Karen's false report was eventually completed, with Mrs. Chen organizing a special makeup event for Ben and the other children who had been affected by the incident. The new hunt included additional safeguards and communication protocols designed to prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. As Ben followed the clues through the neighborhood, he was accompanied by supportive neighbors who had rallied around his family during their ordeal. The event became a celebration of community solidarity and a demonstration that fear and prejudice could not permanently damage the bonds between neighbors who chose to support each other. The final clue led Ben to a treasure chest filled with small gifts from community members. But the real treasure was the knowledge that his neighbors had stood up for him when he needed protection. As he opened the chest, surrounded by friends and family, Ben realized that he had learned something valuable about both the dangers and the possibilities of community life. The incident on Maple Street became a case study in law enforcement training programs, community relations workshops, and civil rights education curricula. The clear video evidence and the dramatic contrast between the reported threat and actual reality made it an effective tool for teaching about the dangers of false reporting and the importance of accurate observation. Ben's story also inspired legislative efforts to strengthen penalties for false emergency reporting, particularly when such reports targeted children or appeared to be motivated by bias. Several states introduced bills requiring enhanced verification procedures for certain types of emergency calls, designed to prevent the kind of escalation that had traumatized the Martinez family. Years later, Ben would look back on that Saturday morning as a turning point in his understanding of justice, community, and the importance of standing up for what is right. The costume that had seemed like such fun in the morning had become the center of a national conversation about fairness and safety. But it had also brought his community together in ways that created lasting, positive change. The neighborhood on Maple Street was forever changed by the events of that day, but ultimately, it became stronger and more united in its commitment to protecting all of its children from both real threats and the dangers that could arise from fear, prejudice, and false reporting. The lesson learned was that true community safety came not from suspicious surveillance of neighbors, but from the careful observation, accurate reporting, and mutual support that allowed children like Ben to play, learn, and grow in environments where they were valued and protected. The Martinez family's courage in pursuing legal action and speaking publicly about their experience had created precedents that would protect other families from similar trauma. Their story became a reminder that individual acts of prejudice could have community-wide consequences, but that communities also had the power to reject such behavior and create better systems for protecting their most vulnerable members. As the seasons changed and life on Maple Street returned to its normal rhythms, the memory of that Saturday morning served as both a warning and an inspiration. It was a warning about how quickly false assumptions could escalate into traumatic encounters. But it was also an inspiration about how communities could come together to support their children and create positive change in response to injustice. Ben Martinez continued to grow and thrive, surrounded by a community that had learned valuable lessons about fairness, accuracy, and the importance of protecting childhood innocence from adult failures. His story had become part of the neighborhood's history, a reminder that even the most ordinary Saturday morning could become extraordinary when communities chose to stand up for what was right and work together to create a better future for all their children.